My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. My soul magnifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God.
Good morning, everyone. We are at 9:15, so we're ready to get started. So we're going to continue our series this morning talking about the life of Absalom, David's son. And there's a lot we can learn from the life of Absalom, and also from how David interacted with him and how he parented him. And so we're going to look at some of that this morning, but really there's a lot that we won't even be able to get to. So we're going to look at David's failures at home, look at Absalom's rebellion and pride, some consequences of disobedience, and then several takeaways that we can glean from this example from the Old Testament. So we'll start with King David and this quote: "No other success can compensate for failure in the home." Have you heard that before? It was made, it was written by an author who I'd never heard of in the early 1900s, but it was made famous by one of the leaders of the LDS Church from the Latter-day Saints, and he really promoted this idea. And in fact, that's where I learned of this saying, was from a friend of mine who was an LDS believer who had this written across the top of his whiteboard in his office. And every time I'd go in to talk to him, I'd see that. And so that was big in their religious movement in the early 1900s. And we can see from David's life that this is true, because when King David had God on his side and conquered the enemy of Israel, so he was a great success as a king, but he didn't listen to God, didn't follow all of God's instructions, and this created major problems for him, and not just for him, but it had consequences for his family and for his children, and Absalom in particular. So, what were God's instructions? They were laid out in Deuteronomy chapter 17, the quote-unquote laws for the kings. And these were kind of the summation of what God told the people before they even had a king. He said, one day you're going to want a king. When you have a king, this is what you shouldn't do. Don't acquire horses from Egypt. Don't acquire many wives. And the rationale was laid out, which was lest the heart of the king turn away from God. And then also don't acquire excessive silver and gold. And then read the law all the days of his life as king. If the kings obeyed these promises, as with most promises of God, there is a reward for that. And the reward is that God promises that kings who do this will continue long in their kingdom for both him and his children in Israel. And so this is what God wanted for Saul and for David and Solomon and all the kings of Israel. And we're going to see where David fell short. This may be a loaded question. It says, don't acquire many wives. That's plural, but how many is too many? I jokingly say, Paul says one in 1 Corinthians 7. He doesn't really say that. He says, have your own wife or husband, which implies exclusivity, singular. But he also says, if you're not married, that's a good thing too. Okay, it's nothing to be ashamed of. You can do a lot of good things, especially for the Lord, if you are unmarried. So marriage was meant to be between one man and one woman. And we see in the Old Testament that polygamy caused a lot of problems. And so we saw that with Abraham and Sarah and their two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and that problem continues to this day. We saw it with Jacob and his two wives. Now, he didn't set out to have two wives initially. He was kind of tricked into this, but nevertheless, he did marry two women, and that became problematic between them and spilled over into his house. And then we see that the first three kings of Israel didn't follow God's advice. Saul had a concubine. at least one that was mentioned in addition to his wife. And then David and Solomon were both known for having many wives. And so, how many wives did David acquire? Well, we read of at least 8. And I'm not going to pronounce these correctly, I don't think, but Michal was the daughter of Saul, was David's first wife. She had no children. There was Ahinoam, which was the mother of David's firstborn son, Amnon. There was Abigail, who was the widow of Nabal, and we talked about that story. There was Maacah, the mother of Absalom, who will be our focus today. Haggith was the mother of Adonijah. Abital was the mother of Shephatiah. I'm not even close. I know. Eglath was the mother of that guy, and then Bathsheba, we know, was the mother of Solomon. She was Uriah's wife. And so, in addition to these, in 2 Samuel 5:13, it says that David took more concubines and wives when he went up to Jerusalem from Hebron, where his initial stronghold was. And so, we don't know exactly how many, but at least 8 were named in the scripture. So what was it? Well, this is from the author of the material that we're studying from, and he says polygamy is just Greek for a dunghill. I think he means that figuratively. David trampled down the first and best law of nature in his palace in Jerusalem, and for his trouble he spent all his after days in the hell on earth. David's palace was a perfect pandemonium of suspicion and intrigue and jealousy and hatred, all breaking out now into incest, now into murder. And it was in such a household, if such a cesspool could be called a household, that Absalom, David's third son by his third living wife, was born and brought up. And so he paints a pretty dark picture here of how this was the author of our book. So that was his kind of narrative of potentially how bad this was. So let's look at Absalom. He was, again, the son of that woman and the grandson of King Talmai. His name, ironically, means father of peace. He grew up during David's nation-building years, and so David is out conquering Israel's foes. He's fighting wars. He's building the capital in Jerusalem. He's doing diplomacy, which probably means a lot of travel, speeches, etc. And so he was a busy man, and the question is, was he too busy to be an involved father? I know I've felt that guilt in my life, and maybe a lot of other fathers have felt that as well, that you spend all this time working to provide for your family, and then you regret maybe the time that you didn't spend at home with them. And there's this kind of tug between work and work in your outside home life and then working at home. And so that's something I think a lot of fathers, or all fathers, struggle with. And I think certainly David did struggle with this, and we'll see that here in a little bit. Absalom witnessed his father's public affair with Bathsheba and saw his father be disgraced, essentially, in front of the entire nation. And that was something that he had to process and live with. Now, David was given a specific punishment for his sin with Bathsheba. If we look at 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 11 through 12, this is what the Lord says: "Out of your own household I am going to bring calamity upon you. Before your very eyes I will take your wives and give them to one who is close to you, and he will sleep with your wives in broad daylight. You did it in secret, but I will do this thing in broad daylight before all of Israel." So this was David's punishment for his affair with Bathsheba. And the Lord didn't, or God didn't say specifically who this was. He just said one who was very close to you, but we will see that this will be Absalom. So David was in a lot of ways a failure at home. He was successful as a king, but he had quarrelsome wives around him. There was all of these step siblings. There was probably alliances and infighting. And there was a father who was kind of embarrassed by this public sin that he had been caught in. And it's very possible that Absalom had little respect for his father. And it's also possible that he received very little discipline from David. So the trouble at home starts with his sister, Tamar. It says that in 2 Samuel that Absalom loved his sister, Tamar. And when his brother raped Tamar, which we see in 2 Samuel 13, David was angry, Absalom was angry, but they both did nothing about it. So if you remember, his brother Amnon was beside himself with lust for his sister, and David's brother, so his uncle, comes to him and says, "What's troubling you?" And Amnon admits to having this, lustful desire for his sister, and instead of David's brother telling him that's not good, you shouldn't do anything about that, he gives him a plan to fulfill his desires. He tells him to fake an illness and ask for Tamar to be brought in to cook him some bread so that he can eat and get strength. And so he asks his father to do this, and David sends Tamar, and eventually Amnon rapes her, and then is so disgusted by himself and by her afterwards that he sends her out. Now, in the course of this, when he confronts her and asks her to sleep with him willingly, she said something interesting. She said, "Ask my father, and he will no doubt give me to you in marriage." That's an interesting quote. Why would David give a daughter into an incestuous relationship? Why would she say that if she didn't? Was she trying to buy time, or did she really believe that David would do that? I think it's very possible that David was willing to do something like that, which again, if that's true, would imply that he was not following God's laws. So she was, pleading to say, "Hey, my father, the king, will let you have me. You just have to ask," which again just implies a breakdown of rules and order in the home. But anyway, that didn't happen, and he rapes her, and Absalom tells her to say nothing of it, keep quiet, just live in his home. He'll take care of her, but he does nothing about it. David does nothing about it. David should have enforced God's law, and one of those laws could have been punishment by death. He could have also forced Amnon to marry Tamar, never to be divorced. That was an option under the Old Testament law. He could have also protected Tamar in his house. He didn't have to give that to his son to do. He could have comforted his daughter and protected her. But from all accounts, he didn't do anything. He didn't discipline anyone. He didn't protect anyone. He just let it go. And how do you think that might have affected his sons to see that happen and see that their dad didn't do anything? As children, you expect, I know my kids did this, when the other kid steps out of line, "Hey, Dad, look what he did, look what she did. You ready to take action on that? You better punish them," right? We're always ready to have our sibling get punished when it's their turn. And I'm sure that Absalom was dealing with this internal conflict of, this disgusting thing just happened. Dad's doing nothing about it.
We're talking about kings and princes,
Mm-hmm.
so they probably felt like they could do anything they wanted.
Jerry's point was that, they lived in a different house than we grew up in. They were princes. There was some power associated with that, and they may have thought that they had more latitude to do things. So let's look at 2 Samuel 13, 28 and 29. Get my Bible open here. I'm actually going to start up a little higher in verse 23. So Absalom has been brewing on this for 2 years. And so it says, 2 years later, when Absalom's sheep shearers were at Baal Hazor, near the border of Ephraim, he invited all the king's sons to come there. So he invited all of his brothers. And Absalom went to the king and said, "Your servant has had shearers come. Will the king and his attendants please join me?" "No, my son," the king replied. "All of us should not go. We would only be a burden to you." Although Absalom urged him, he still refused to go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon come with us." The king asked him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom urged him, so he sent with him Amnon and the rest of the king's sons. So Absalom ordered his men, "Listen, when Amnon is in high spirits from drinking wine, and I say to you, 'Strike Amnon down,' then kill him, don't be afraid. Haven't I given you this order? Be strong and brave." So Absalom's men did to Amnon what Absalom had ordered. Then all the king's sons got up and mounted their mules and fled. So he has his brother killed, but not by his hand. He does it through his servants. And so he takes justice into his own hands by killing his brother. And he then has to flee. So where does he go? He goes to the city of his grandfather. And that was on his mother's side, the king we mentioned earlier. And while David is relieved that Amnon has been punished, it's not due to anything he did. And so let's look at that at the end of that chapter there, verses 37 through 39. It says, "Absalom fled and went to Talmai, son of Amminhud, the king of Geshur. But King David mourned many days for his son. And after Absalom fled and went to Geshur, he stayed there 3 years. And King David longed to go to Absalom, for he was consoled concerning Amnon's death." So David feels better that his son was finally punished, but again, he had nothing to do with it. He's just glad that somebody took care of business. And he misses his other son, but again, we see that he really didn't do anything himself. So turn over one chapter to 2 Samuel 14, and we see that after hiding out with his grandfather for 3 years, Absalom is ready to return back to Jerusalem and back to the family. So verse 23.
Would not Amnon have been
Heir to the kingdom, might be the eldest.
Yeah. David's point was that he would have been the heir as the oldest son. Amnon would have been. So it says, "Then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, 'He must go to his own house. He must not see my face.' So Absalom went into his own house and did not see the face of the king." Contrast that with the image of God as the prodigal father. It's completely opposite of God's response to a wayward son coming home. David doesn't want to see him. And how do you think Absalom felt about that? Not good. He probably wants some form of reconciliation with his father. He's had 3 years to live with what he had done. Joab, the commander of David's men, goes to get him, so he's kind of being brought home in a way, and yet David doesn't want to see him, sends him to his house. We read more about Absalom in 2 Samuel 14. He's described as a very handsome man. Nobody is as handsome as Absalom. Remember how that turned out for King Saul? He was also considered the most handsome man in Israel at the time. Good looks are not doing well for people in this time in history. So he's got good looks. His sister was also described as good looking. He's probably come from a very good looking family, which gets you a lot, both back then and today, right? There's a lot of privilege, as we say, that comes with having good looks. But outward appearances don't translate into the heart. And we see that he's a handsome devil. He starts to hatch this plan to undermine his father, and he begins to steal the hearts of the people away from King David. Let's look at 2 Samuel 15. In my Bible, it's titled Absalom's Conspiracy. So in the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. He would get up early and stand by the side of the road leading to the city gate. And whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, "What town are you from?" And he would answer, "Your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel." Then Absalom would say to him, "Look, your claims are valid and proper, but there is no representative of the king to hear you." And then Absalom would add, "If only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or case could come out to me, and I would see that they receive justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way towards all of the Israelites asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. So he is parading himself around with a chariot and people in front of him. He's making himself look important. He's undermining David's leadership. He's finding people that have complaints, that want David to judge, and he's basically telling him, no one's going to hear your case. If only I were in charge, things would be different. And he's stealing the hearts of the people. And we see that this actually was an effective strategy. He becomes very influential to the point that he plots to control the throne of Israel from Hebron. So he starts to gather followers, he starts to amass fighters, and he's hatching this conspiracy to take the throne. And so it gets to David in verse 13 of 2 Samuel 15. And the messenger comes and says to David, "The hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom." So his plot is effective. He has the people on his side now. And this worries David, so he flees. He gets all of his officials together and says, "Hey, we got to get out of here, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must move quickly, or he will bring us ruin and put us in the city to the sword." And so they flee. And Absalom is able to take control, and on the advice of a counselor, sleeps with David's concubines on the roof of the palace. So they put up a tent, and the counselor says, "This is how you exert your influence and your control. You, in full view of everyone, bring all of his concubines in and sleep with them." And so this fulfills God's prophecy and punishment to David that someone close to him would sleep with his wives in broad daylight, just as he had secretly done with Bathsheba. And eventually David rallies his troops to fight Absalom and his men, but he sends out an order. He says, "Don't harm Absalom." So even after all that Absalom has done, he's murdered one of David's sons, he's stolen the people's hearts and over the throne in a way, David still loves him and doesn't want him killed. But we see that his hair is his undoing. So part of his good looks was his beautiful hair. It describes in 2 Samuel how once a year he would cut his hair, and his hair weighed, I can't remember the exact amount of weight, but it was a lot. And so he has this long hair, and as he's riding his mule, he gets caught in a tree by his hair, and it's just hanging there. And that's where Joab, the commander of David's army, finds him. And Joab disobeys David's order and kills him. Again, we don't see that Joab was punished. Joab directly defied King David's order not to kill Absalom, and there is no mention of punishment. Joab maintains his position as the commander of the army going forward, and there's no consequences. And that seems to be a recurring theme in David's affairs, that people that don't listen to him don't pay any consequences. We also see then that David mourns Absalom's death in 2 Samuel 18:33. There's this kind of classic, "Oh, Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you." What do you think that means? Why was David mourning his son. There's a couple things that doesn't explain why exactly, but I think one of the possibilities is that he knew that his son was lost. He was, perhaps never going to see him again because of, the nature of the life he lived. And had he had more time, maybe he could have turned that around. We know that David was a man after God's own heart, and the Bible shows us that that's God's heart attitude towards us, that no one should perish. He knows that some will, but his desire is that none of us should be separated from him. But we only have a finite amount of time to make that decision to accept salvation. And perhaps that's why David was so upset. It's also, possible that this was just, the sorrow of a father who lost another son physically. Again, we're not exactly told why. But remorse is pointless. It's a wish to have acted when you no longer have any option. So it's not in the Bible, but it's a famous saying. It's too late when we die to admit we don't see eye to eye. He should have resolved his conflicts and his arguments while there was time, and he wouldn't have had this regret. And we're reminded of that in Hebrews chapter 12, verses 14 and 15. Make every effort to live in peace with everyone and to be holy. Without holiness, no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one having trouble this morning. See to it that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many. We see that bitterness did sprout up in Absalom's life. He was very bitter about what had happened to his sister, bitter perhaps about the lack of consequences, the lack of discipline by David, and he, embarrasses David. He conspires against him. He tries to take the throne and causes a great amount of trouble for David. And one of the many reasons why conflicts should be resolved quickly and while there is still time to resolve them. So what are some takeaways we can see? There's a lot. One of the big ones for parents is that an unhappy and an undisciplined home will produce unbalanced, or as they say these days, unhinged children. I think we can all see examples of that in life, that when you don't have discipline at home, children just don't turn out well. Children want a structured environment. You don't have to be a biblical scholar to know that. Psychology teaches us that children need structure. They need predictability. They need discipline. They need, to see that consequences or that actions have consequences, and they want that to be predictable. If it's unpredictable, then they just learn not to trust people. So David was a public success by all measures. He built a great kingdom, handed off a growing kingdom to his son Solomon, but he was a very large failure privately. And a lot of that came from his own sin with Bathsheba, from not following the instructions of God and concerning having multiple wives. And it speaks to us today as parents. What home are we building? Are we building happy, loving, God-centered homes, or is there a void because we're chasing other things in life? We're chasing success or money or our own entertainment, because Satan will fill that void. He'll happily step in there and create conflict and lead our children away from us and from God. Proverbs 3, so Solomon knows the importance of this, perhaps because of what he saw in the life of his father. He says, "My son, do not resent the Lord's discipline, and do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as a father the son he delights in." I wonder if Solomon was disciplined. I wonder if David learned from his older children and perhaps corrected some of his failings, and hopefully maybe Solomon did get a better upbringing than some of the older children before him. But regardless of whether he learned this firsthand or God gave it to him, inspired, it's absolutely correct that we need to both discipline and accept discipline because it should be in love. Another takeaway is that when we let bitterness and pride take over our heart, that can lead to rebellion. It can lead to rebellion against God, rebellion against earthly authority, and it just emphasizes the importance of love and humility as being the opposite of bitterness and pride. Hearts that are loving, hearts that are humble, are not going to fall into the trap that leads to rebellion and ultimately our downfall. Lack of discipline breeds resentment and breeds insecurity. Again, there was not one example in the scriptures of David ever disciplining his children, didn't discipline his own commander. And again, children need structure, they need enforcement of rules so that they kind of can know that life is predictable and that actions have consequences. And then not repairing a broken relationship inflicts wounds that never heal. Absalom never forgave David for not punishing his brother. It motivated him to the point that he wanted to steal the throne. But Absalom also had to live with that guilt. He never, in some ways being disciplined kind of gives closure to something. If you are never disciplined, you kind of maybe live with that guilt a little heavier, knowing that you got away with it. So that correction could have perhaps assuaged some of that guilt and helped Absalom deal with the consequences of his own sin, but he never got that opportunity. He just let it grow, as Hebrews says, into a root that turned into a lot of trouble for everyone. David then ultimately had to live with the guilt and remorse of having lost 2 sons instead of just 1 because he never took any action to discipline the first for what he had done. And he let Absalom take vengeance, and when it should have been David's vengeance to take against Amnon. And so, again, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And if we try to take it into our own hands, it's just things turn out badly. So what should we do? We should fear God and keep his commandments. That's probably the first part of David's downfall, was he didn't listen to God's instruction. There's examples of David reading scripture, of reading commandments. So he probably knew these things. He didn't keep them. Fathers and mothers need to model godly leadership in the home, and we should not harbor grudges. And Colossians chapter 3, verses 5 through 10. Put to death, therefore, whatever belongs to your earthly nature: sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, which is idolatry. Because of these, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must also rid yourselves of all such things as these: anger, rage, malice, slander, filthy language from your lips. Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and have put on a new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator. So, again, many instances in the Bible where we're instructed of the importance of letting go of anger, letting go of grudges, having a heart of forgiveness as Jesus forgave us. Because if we hold on to that vengeance and take it in place of God, it just doesn't turn out well. We need to leave it in God's hands. And then we need to be willing to reconcile with those who seek reconciliation. Absalom probably wanted to reconcile with his father, and David never gave him that opportunity for whatever reason. We see this great sadness of David when his son died, but he had a chance. He had all these chances to reconcile that and to make it right with Absalom, but he just, I don't know if it was, stubbornness or anger or what it was, but he did not give Absalom that chance to reconcile. And if he did, I think things would have turned out differently. Perhaps Absalom would not have plotted to overthrow David if he had just, gotten that reconciliation, that forgiveness or punishment, whatever he needed to move forward in life in a good way. He never got that from his father. And so for all of David's successes, he had some very intense personal failures that started in the home, started with his lack of following God's commands, and that ultimately led to so much sadness, so much infighting, led to the loss of two of his sons. And we need to hopefully learn from that if there is sadness and you don't do anything about it, it's going to end in sadness. If we don't let go of grudges and bitterness and let pride lead us down a path, it's going to end in destruction. We need to love and forgive as Christ forgave us, and put away pride and humbly seek God. I think pride played a big part in Absalom's failures and also in David's failures as well, that he was just too proud to humble himself and reconcile with his son. We have a few minutes left. These are all the slides, so what questions or thoughts do we have today?
A lot of supposedly good men have a bunch of bad children in this series of lessons through here that we've been studying. It just seems like even Samuel just did some bad things. Saul, David, all these people, that like you say, they've spent so much time being away from home doing the things that they felt like they should be doing rather than minding things at home as much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The comment was that there's a lot of, in this series of lessons, a lot of good men that neglected to raise their children right and had their children go down pretty wrong paths. Yes?
Children has no help to feel the parents. Parents feel the children they want to be their children's best friends.
Yeah,
Child's best friend.
TC's point is...
Young people, terms. Who's in authority? They are you.
Yeah, his point's well taken that we still see this today. David was afraid of Absalom. He fled his throne, he fled his city, and we have that today. We have parents that live in fear of their children because of their rebellion and their wild living, and part of that perhaps stems from a lack of discipline and more of trying to befriend their child rather than to parent their child. That's always a bad way to go, is to be your child's friend. You can be their mentor when they get older. You can have a friendship with them when they're older and move into more of a mentor position. But as a young child, they need you to parent, to discipline. So, absolutely. Well, we'll go ahead and finish a little bit early. There's nothing wrong with that. And thanks, everyone, for your attention.